Hi, and welcome to the NFL Fan Forum. My name is Art, aka the Sea Cow, and this is my sidekick John, aka the Cowlick.
What's up?
Thanks for joining us today. On today's show, we're going to break down which free agents the Denver Broncos and Seattle Seahawks will look to keep, and which ones will be let go for the 2021 offseason. But first, our play of the day.
Brady goes for the deep shot. He's got a touchdown! Scotty Miller! Oh my gosh!
As we all know, off-season free agency is a very important time period for all 32 NFL teams. Starting on March 18th, these decisions are going to be based on best fit for the team and affordability compared to the team's salary cap situation. On our show today, we're going to be discussing every player for the Broncos and Seahawks that are going to be unrestricted free agents and what we feel the team should be doing with them going forward. First off, let's start off with the Denver Broncos. Our first player we will be discussing is safety Justin Simmons. Simmons is 28 years old and played all defensive snaps this year. He also recorded 77 tackles, 5 interceptions, and 9 pass defenses. He had a good year. So what are your thoughts on Simmons? Do you think the Broncos should keep him?
Oh yes, 100%. Simmons needs to be paid. We are in need of safety help, and keeping him on this roster would mean so much to us. I mean, he's a Pro Bowler this year. He had 5 interceptions, and he's just done very well for us. He had a little bit of a down year this year, but he's going to get better next year with Vic Fangio's defense. So I expect him to be better next year, and yeah, we really should re-sign him. We should re-sign him for like the rest of his career, as long as he doesn't retire anytime soon. But man, we need to re-sign this guy.
I think I agree with you. The Broncos would be smart to keep him around in the secondary for this year. So let's move on to our next player, which is right tackle Elijah Wilkinson. Wilkinson is 26 years old and played in almost half the offensive snaps this year. So what are your thoughts on Wilkinson remaining a Bronco in 2021?
I hope that he's not with the Broncos in 2021 because he sucks. He's not a good right tackle. He's the one that let one of the Steelers defenders loose, and that caused Drew Lock to get injured. So we really don't need him on our team. We can get better right tackles from free agency and from the draft. So I wouldn't be surprised if Elijah Wilkinson isn't back next year. If he is back, I will be surprised because we really don't need him, and he's terrible.
I think you're right. There are better tackles out there, but we'll see what new general manager George Paton thinks of this decision. So moving on, let's talk about defensive tackle Shelby Harris. Harris had 20 tackles and 2.5 sacks this year before his knee injury placed him on injured reserve. At 29 years of age, he is still in the middle of his prime. So what do you think the Broncos will do with Harris?
They should hopefully keep him because Jurrell Casey is also a free agent. And if I had to pick one of the two, I would take Shelby Harris because he's actually younger than Jurrell Casey, despite being 29 years old. So I would want to keep Shelby Harris. Jurrell Casey, he has been great, but he's been injured, and I think that hurt him. And he's getting older. So I would take Shelby Harris, and I hope that we re-sign him.
Shelby Harris is a disruptive force in the middle, but we'll see what happens. Our next player we will be discussing is safety Will Parks. Parks came back to the Broncos late in the season after coming over from the Eagles. He is 26 years old and had 27 tackles, but no interceptions. So what do you think the Broncos should do here?
What they should do, they should re-sign him, but as like a backup. He has been great when he was with us, but he's been pretty good. He's been decent, but we might get a safety in the draft. We might actually draft one. So that's why I want him for depth, so that way in case one of our safeties get injured, then we'll be able to look up to him because he's been pretty good as a safety. So I would re-sign him. I would definitely keep him, but as a backup.
A team can never seem to have enough defensive backs, that's for sure. Our next player is defensive end Jeremiah Tatu. He is 28 years old and played almost 40% of the defensive snaps this year. He had 24 tackles and 5 sacks in limited duty. So what do the Broncos do here?
What they should do, like I said with Will Parks, they should re-sign him back, but as a backup. He has been great for us. The reason why I say we should re-sign him for depth is because we have Bradley Chubb, we have Von Miller, who's probably going to stay here for 1 more year, and then we have Malik Reed, who's looking amazing. Jeremiah Tatu is also looking amazing, but he hasn't had enough snaps under his belt, is what I should say. But Atachu, he has been great for us, but we should just keep him as a depth piece, so in case Bradley Chubb gets injured yet again, or Von Miller, we'll have him as a depth piece. We might go for a few edge rushers in the draft too, but we should still keep him as like the second edge rusher to like Von Miller or Bradley Chubb.
I think Atachu is a decent edge rusher, worth keeping as a backup also. So let's move on to the right tackle, DeMar Dotson. He is 36 years old, a long-playing veteran, and he also played 42% of the offensive snaps this year. So what do you think the Broncos should do with Dotson?
I mean, I don't think we should keep him, honestly. He was there to replace Elijah Wilkinson, and I'm going to admit DeMar Dotson is much better than Elijah Wilkinson, but barely. DeMar Dotson is not as great, though, as some of the other offensive tackles like Garrett Bowles and Dalton Reisner. DeMar Dotson is old, he's rusty, and he's not that great of a right tackle, to be honest with you. He's too old to be a right tackle. I wouldn't be surprised if we keep him. I would be kind of surprised that we keep him just for depth, but if we get rid of him, I won't be surprised. We really should get rid of him or trade him for some draft picks, but we really shouldn't keep him. He's just too old and rusty, and we can just find some better right tackles in the draft and free agency that are younger than him. So yeah, we should just get rid of him, in my opinion.
So let's move on to defensive tackle DeMarcus Walker. Walker is 26 years old and played in about 35% of the defensive snaps this year. He had 9 tackles and 4.5 sacks in limited duty. So what's your thinking that the Broncos should do with Walker?
Walker, he has been decent for us. He's been pretty good. I think we should, like what I said with Will Parks and Jeremiah Tatu, we should keep him as like a backup to some people like Draymond Jones, Shelby Harris, and Deshaun Williams. We should really keep him as a backup because we pretty much have a better defensive lineman than him. Don't get me wrong, DeMarcus Walker, he's pretty good, but he hasn't been playing that well for us recently. I know he has 4.5 sacks, but that was just like terrible offensive line by offensive linemen that miscovered him, and that led to sacks. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got rid of him, but I really do think we should re-sign him and keep him as a backup to somebody like Draymond Jones or Shelby Harris.
Defensive tackles are always nice to have in case of injury or as a rotational piece. So I agree with that. So let's move on to defensive tackle Sylvester Williams. Williams is a 33-year-old veteran who played only about 16% of the defensive snaps this year. He only had 4 tackles. So what do the Broncos do here?
I know he was a Super Bowl 50 champion with the Broncos, and he came back this year because we had too many injuries at defensive tackle. So I'm glad that we had him back, but we gotta let him go. He's too old for a defensive tackle. He was great during the Super Bowl 50 era, but now that's in the past now. Today, he is very old and rusty, and he has barely played anything for the Broncos this year. So, gotta get rid of him. He's too old. Just leave him on the free agent market, and hopefully he can find somewhere else to play. Or maybe he just retires altogether. You never know. But we don't need him anymore. We have better defensive tackles, and we can get better defensive tackles from free agency and the draft.
So let's move on to linebacker Anthony Ciccolo. Ciccolo is 28 years old and played about 15% of the defensive snaps this year. He had 7 tackles and a sack. So what did the Broncos do?
Anthony Ciccolo, He's been pretty good. He did have 1 sack, but that was in the Patriots game where he sacked Cam Newton. He hasn't been really doing much for us, really. It's just that, like I said, we can keep Jeremiah Tatu. He's been very good for us. But Anthony Ciccolo, I mean, I guess, but he might go to the practice squad for us, maybe at best for next year. Or we might trade him, or we just let him walk in free agency and see what deals he gets. Maybe he goes to another team, which is the most likely scenario. I don't think we're going to keep him, honestly. We have Bradley Chubb. We have Alexander Johnson. We don't need another pass rusher like him. I think we're good with him. If we keep him, I wouldn't be surprised. If we get rid of him, I wouldn't be surprised either. So, I don't really care what we do with him, but as long as he finds where he wants to be, either the Broncos or somewhere else, I am happy.
Our last unrestricted free agent for the Broncos we will be discussing is cornerback Devontae Bosby. Bosby is 28 years old and played in 25% of the defensive snaps this year. He had 21 tackles and 5 pass defenses. So what do you think the Broncos should do here?
Well, what I thought of him before the season, I thought we should keep him as a backup. But we kept him as a 4th stringer, which I was surprised about. Then he went to the Cardinals practice squad, and then he came back to start for us because we had too many injuries at corner. And ever since all those injuries happened, I thought he'd be a great corner to show up and show what he's got. He had some flashes, but they were rare. Like really, really rare. He did not do that good as a corner. I thought he would do better, but it turns out he actually didn't do as good as I thought he would. So I'm disappointed in that. So judging by how much he played and how well he played against other teams, I don't think we should keep him, honestly, because after what I saw from him, I'm very disappointed and I expected better from him. So either we should keep him on our practice squad or we should let him go. But the most ideal thing to do is to keep him on our practice squad and help him develop, because I believe he has potential, but he hasn't shown it, and he went to the CFL, so I do believe he has talent. We should keep him at the practice squad, but we could also choose to let him go. So now let's move on from the Broncos and look at the Seattle Seahawks. Let's first start with veteran linebacker KJ Wright. Wright is 31 years old and played in 86% of all defensive snaps. He had 86 tackles, 2 sacks, and an interception. So what should the Seahawks do with Wright?
So I think they should keep him. I really believe that. KJ Wright is one of the original OG Seahawks for Pete Carroll, and he has played phenomenal since the injury a few years ago. When I thought that he might be winding down, he's gotten that much better. And then this year they moved him over to strong side linebacker from the weak side, and since he already knew how to play all the linebacker spots anyway, it wasn't too hard of a transition. But even at his more advanced age, he just played phenomenal defense. All those numbers that you mentioned, that just kind of tells the story. He's done very, very well. He thrives in that strong side linebacker position, and I really think that coming back for another year or two is in the works. So yeah, if we can get a good deal for him, I really think we should keep him. That's what I think.
I agree. His game experience is too valuable to lose. Our next free agent is linebacker Bruce Irvin. Irvin was injured in the second week of the season with a torn ACL and placed on injured reserve. So what should the Seahawks do here?
I know that he was in the same draft as Bobby Wagner and Russell Wilson, and he was our first-round pick. And there is a sentimental side to this, that he's back. But in all honesty, unless he takes a lot less money at his older advanced age, I don't see him on the team. I really think that we can get somebody better. And it's unfortunate because he really wanted to play for us really hard. But if he isn't willing to take less money and possibly be a rotational piece because we got Carlos Dunlap to fill the Leo spot now. And now we have Jordan Brooks as well. These guys are looking more like a valuable piece of the team. So I would think that Bruce Irvin more than likely will be let go. Unfortunately, he never got his chance this year. But there is a slim possibility that, you could stay with us, with the Seahawks, and then help out being a rotational piece. I would hope that would happen because I think he does deserve at least 1 year, to be on the team and actually be a part of the team in some way or capacity, because he's really been excited to be back, and I just hope that happens. But we'll see what happens. If he doesn't take less money, I have a feeling that we just won't be able to afford him, and he's going to have to be let go.
We'll see what happens. So let's move on to cornerback Quinton Dunbar. Dunbar had an injury-filled season and only played at 35% of the time and finished the season on injured reserve. So what should the Seahawks do here?
Well, Quinton Dunbar was brought in to be the opposite corner from Shaquille Griffin, and it never really fully materialized. He seemed to have gotten injured constantly, and then finally we just put him on injured reserve. But the moments that he was healthy and played well, you could see that he is a pretty good corner, and he fits into Pete Carroll's type of system. Actually, it was a really nice mesh of being able to do the side kick and be able to, the step kick and be able to get that positioning well on the receivers, and he picked it up pretty well. It was just too bad, again, that he got injured, and he has that problem with being injured. This is going to be a touchy situation. First off, he's going to have to take less money to come back to the Seahawks once he's healthy. And also, Shaquille Griffin, I'm not sure if he's coming back, but we'll see about that. We'll talk about that here in a few minutes. But if he doesn't, then keeping Quinton Dunbar would be a good thing, I would think, just to have him as depth and maybe even as one of the starters like we had planned in the first place. Hopefully he stays healthy this time. He has a lot of potential. He's only 29 years old. He's not that old, and a lot of experience. So I'm hoping we can keep him, but for a lesser price.
For injured players, it is hard to get good deals. Moving on, our next player is tight end Jacob Hollister. Hollister is 27 years old and played it in 35% of offensive snaps. He had 25 receptions for 209 yards and 3 touchdowns. So what should the Seahawks do with Hollister?
You know what? I really like Jacob Hollister. He really seems to be a guy who tries to get open. He's a real hustler. He's not the best blocker, but he's working on it and getting better, I really think, to where he's kind of like an H-back in a way. But he really has a good knack of getting open, and he can catch the ball really well in clutch situations, as we've seen in the last year and a half that we've had him. I would think that we'd have to get him to a little bit of a deal that's a lot less money than he had this year, say around the $2.5 million a year time frame, something around that kind of a deal. And I really think that keeping him would be a good idea now that Greg Olsen is retired. So that would be a decent tight end room still with Will Dissly and also Colby Parkinson, the second-year player soon to be. And I think that'd be a good tight end room to have Hollister on that group. So in that group. So I really think keeping Hollister is a good idea. And for a little bit less money, keep him for a couple more years. That's what I think.
Moving on, we have defensive end Benson Mayowa. Mayowa is 29 years old and played it in almost half of all defensive snaps this year. He had 24 tackles and 6 sacks. So what should Seattle do here?
I think they should keep him. Benson Mayowa was originally, undrafted with Seattle back in 2012. But he has really, really come along as he's gone to different teams. He came over from the Raiders this year, and he had learned a whole bunch of ways to be a good defensive end and getting to sack the quarterbacks. His experience has really improved, and I think that he had a good year this year, considering he had a few nagging injuries as well earlier in the year. He still ended up with 6 sacks. And when Carlos Dunlap came over, it changed the whole defensive line, and I really think that keeping these guys together will be very beneficial for the defense this year. So I would say keeping Benson Mayowa is a priority. I would keep him, and hopefully we can keep him to a minimum contract. But again, he had a decent year, so we'll see what happens. But I definitely want to keep him, that's for sure.
Pass rushers are always nice to have, that's for sure. Now let's move on to running back Carlos Hyde. Hyde is 30 years old, and he played in 25% of all offensive snaps. He had 356 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns. Do the Seahawks look to keep him?
I think we should. I really think we should, because the running back game, there have been some injuries there. And I think having guys that are able to go and know the system and run hard, guys like Carlos Hyde, I think are just very, very nice to have as a backup option or a starting option when the starter's hurt, like Chris Carson was this year. I really think that having him has been a blessing in some cases. He's shown explosive plays. If he had played a full season at even 50% of capacity, he'd have had, say, 8 to 9 touchdowns rushing and at least 700 to 800 yards rushing as well. So I think that a guy like this is a very good person to have. He also really fights hard for the yardage, just like Chris Carson. He's really kind of in the mold that Pete Carroll likes. If they can get him for a good price, I really think keeping him would be a good thing to do, and it would make the team just that much more stable at the running game.
Our next player is a strong veteran offensive lineman. Guard Mike Upati only played about half the time for this offense because of injury. What should the Seahawks do here?
Well, Mike Upati's been in the league since 2010. He's going to be 34 years old in May. He's very old, and he's been very banged up over the years, dealt with a lot of injuries. Have to give the guy a warrior badge for just continuing to fight on through injuries and stuff. But I think it's time to move on. I think the Seahawks need to look for a guard in the second round of the draft, one of the top guards in the draft this year. I think that's the way to go. Maybe go free agency, but again, with the cap situation being what it is, we don't have much flexibility, much room. So if I were the Seahawks, I would do the second round pick and get the best guard available. And I would say goodbye to Upati and say thank you very much for all your work and all your dedication. He's been a great veteran all of these years, but I think that it's time for him to move on and maybe even retire.
Yeah, he has been a good player for a long time. Now let's move on to running back Chris Carson. Carson is 26 years old and played in 38% of offensive snaps this year. He had 681 yards and 5 touchdowns. What should the team do here?
I really think they should re-sign him. He had a great yards per carry average, almost 5 per carry. It was too bad that Brian Schottenheimer, thankfully who's not here anymore, wasn't running the ball more in certain cases, because in certain games he was really on a roll and finding openings and getting big chunks of yards, but then he would just go away from him and then Russell Wilson would take a sack or something stupid would happen and then a drive would end. That was getting very irritating. Anyways, yes, they definitely need to bring him back. It's too bad he had some injuries this year, but I think overall he really showed that he needs to stay on this team. He runs really hard. He's very dedicated to his craft at getting better every year. If he can just stay healthy, that would be the best thing, of course. But I know that Pete Carroll really loves him. He runs just like he likes. And with a good offensive line in front of him, I really think he can be a really good keeper to have. And if he can be around the $5-6 million a year range, I think that's a really good bargain for Chris Carson. But we'll see what happens. I just really think that he's the best starter we have. I just think keeping it would be a great idea.
Yeah, Carson is a beast. Let's see what happens. Let's move on to offensive tackle Cedric Ogbah. Ogbah filled in nicely at tackle this year, playing in 26% of all snaps. What should the Seahawks do here?
Well, Ogbah came in and he was backing up at the right tackle for Brandon Shell. But when Shell got hurt, he filled in, and at first he was having some trouble, but later on he played really well. I thought he filled in very nicely. I think we should keep him. I think we can get him for a decent deal. And again, having backup tackles is not a bad thing. You just never know when you need them. And who knows, he might even win a starting job. Maybe when Dwayne Brown moves on. He's getting very old. We'll see. He was a first-round pick by the Bengals. He's not that old. He's only 28. I think give him a good off-season. I think he has a good chance of trying to get a starting position. And I think we should keep him if he comes if he asks for a decent price.
Another offensive lineman, center Ethan Posick, is an unrestricted free agent. He is 25 years old and played in 87% of offensive snaps. What should Pete Carroll do here?
I think Pete Carroll should keep him. I think that Ethan Posick has done an admirable job this year. I think he came in. He wasn't as they expected to be the starter at center, but I think he really took the reins. He has the directional capabilities to remember how to remember the snaps and do the plays right and blocking right. He's been able to just jump right in, and he's done very well. I think they should keep him, and I think he's going to come at a decent price too. I don't think he's going to be too expensive. And to have a nice center that can do very well and block very well, and he's big and strong, tall, I think that we should keep him. He's played very well, and he's been very durable as well. So, yeah, I definitely think we should keep him, hopefully at a good price.
Our next player is cornerback Shaquille Griffin. Griffin is 25 years old and played in 74% of defensive snaps. He had 63 tackles and 3 interceptions. What should the Seahawks do here?
Well, I really like Shaquille Griffin. I really like his brother Shaquem as well. They're like a package deal. They're very positive players. And as for Shaquille on the corner spot, it's going to depend on how much money he's going to be asking for. He's a decent corner. He's not a lockdown corner. He is okay. He's pretty good. He's still kind of young, but he's showed that he's decent. He really has. But if he's asking for too much money, I would say no. And we'll just have to go in a different direction, whether it's the draft or whether it's another free agent that's less expensive. I just really think that the way DJ Reed came out of nowhere and started playing really well, and then we're going to have Quinton Dunbar back from injury. I just think that Shaquille I think he's a decent player. I think that if we can get him back for a decent price, I think we should, and keep developing him, because obviously Pete Carroll is very good with corners, teaching them things. But if he asks for too much money, I really think that we need to move on, save some of that salary cap, and we can get somebody for a less expensive price. That's what I think.
That will definitely be an interesting decision. And now the last player we will be discussing is wide receiver David Moore. Moore is 26 years old and played in 45% of offensive snaps. He had 35 receptions for 417 yards and 6 touchdowns. What should the Seahawks do here?
Well, I really like David Moore. He's an undrafted rookie who became a starter in a couple years' time. He's played very well when called upon as a third receiver. Every time they've tried to move him out of the third receiver spot, whether it was with Josh Gordon or with Philip Dorsett or somebody else, he seems to always be able to be there and be healthy and make plays. And so I think for a good price, I think we should keep the guy. I think he's a decent receiver. He comes in a pinch if a wide receiver gets injured. He knows the plays. Now he's starting to get a lot of confidence, and so I think we should keep him. He was just a really good player to have, and so I think we can definitely look to keep him. That's what I would do. So that'll do it for our show today. Tell us what you think in the comments section below. Be sure to destroy that like button and subscribe to our channel. By the way, don't forget to turn on that notification bell so that you'll be notified when we post a new video. Thanks for joining us. This has been Art
And John.
signing off.